When most people think of the World of Greyhawk, they think of the Flanaess. That's the place with the Great Kingdom and the city of Greyhawk and all kinds of different things like that we're all familiar with from the folio and the gold box and so on. What most people don't realize is that there's a whole nother part of the planet of the World of Greyhawk that is that is very well fleshed out and is canon. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Greyhawk Grognarn. So in 2001, Wizards of the Coast wanted to do a skirmish game based on Dungeons & Dragons. There are a lot of skirmish games out there that are very successful. Things like Frostgrave and things like that. There's a lot of fantasy skirmish games out there. I think Games Workshop probably has something along those lines. Maybe, I don't know. So Wizards of the Coast naturally wanted to get in on the act, and what they came up with was a second edition, or a new edition, of Chainmail. It really had nothing to do mechanically with the original Chainmail that preceded the original Dungeons & Dragons, back from Guidon Games and TSR. But what they did was they used the name again because it's evocative of the old, links things to the old. And they came up with a pretty neat little skirmish game based on D&D, and they set it in the World of Greyhawk, but they set it in the far, far west of the continent of Oerik, so that you would, there's a little bit of connection between the Flanaess, which is the place in the World of Greyhawk that we're all familiar with, and this new setting. The setting is called the Sundered Empire, and it all has to do with the setup of the game. Because for a skirmish game, it's very good to have factions. So they set up these different factions based on this history that they created. And basically, the premise of the skirmish game is that there used to be a god called Stratus, who is an Iridian god, one of the brothers of Hextor and Hyronius, who are very well-known gods in the Flanaess. He's a god of war. He's a lawful neutral god of war, just like their lawful evil and lawful good gods of war. So it kind of works all out that way. And this god of war is slain by a party of adventurers who think that in doing so they're going to be able to end war. But of course it doesn't work out that way. And what is called the panoply of Stratus is separated and falls down to Oerik in this far western part of Oerik. And different factions have different parts of his stuff, so one faction has one thing that used to belong to the god, and another faction has another part of the panoply, and the idea is all these factions are fighting and squabbling to get the whole part of to reassemble the panoply, and thus assume the position of the god of war themselves. And that's the basic premise of the game. You've got these various factions, each of whom have different strengths and weaknesses and so forth, and they are all they're all going out looking for these artifacts belonging to this god Stratus. So as you might imagine, this has a lot of impact on the World of Greyhawk. Basically anything, I don't remember the exact year that it's set in, that the death of Stratus takes place, but to be sure, something that's set in 576 or even 585, Stratus is around and alive, and that has a great number of implications. Even if the Stratus cult is kind of overshadowed by the cults of his brothers, he's still around as an Iridian god. It also implies that a number of Iridian and possibly other explorers and colonists from the Flanaess went east over the ocean and eventually came around to the other side of Oerik and established these kingdoms and civilizations and so forth that are very close to those that you would find in the Flanaess. So it's really a great implication that there are a lot of implications for a regular campaign that's set in the Flanaess, not only for the possibility of following in their footsteps and ending up in this Sundered Empire setting, but also for the fact that if your campaign is set early enough in the canon, there's another god that had never been described before. I actually did a whole write-up on clerics of Stratus in my 5e Greyhawk stuff, which is available for free on the blog. The link is below. And it's a really cool bit that there's this whole developed area in Oerik that is not really well known. So I'm going to go through the rule book, the starter rule book, real quick, and maybe explore a little of these factions and the setting itself. So this is the map of the setting for the skirmish game. It's called the Sundered Empire. And the name comes from one of the factions here called Revilla, which I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's right here, this little, this part here. And this used to be called the Dragon Empire of Revilla, and it's an elvish kingdom that used to encompass most of the area that you see on the map in the upper left corner here. It was obviously overthrown and sundered, hence the name. The factions are, pretty standard stuff in terms of what you'd expect to see in a skirmish game. They're all very distinct. Some of the factions have already captured some of the panoply of Stratus. Some of them have not and are scrambling to get their hands on part of it. Revilla obviously is elves. They do not have any of the panoply. Up here next to them is Naresh. That is a faction of gnolls in these mountains here. They recovered the flail of Stratus, and of course that has kind of a connection to the flail of Yenogu, the demon lord of gnolls. So that's why they're they think they're infernally inspired. Amut's Legion is an undead faction here. They have the Spear of Stratus, and they're led by an undead wizard Amut. I think he's a lich or something. There's Drazen's Horde here. Drazen's Horde is a faction of hobgoblins, and they recovered the Axe of Stratus. There is Thalos here, which is this island and a part of the mainland next to it. This is the human realm. They're like paladins and good. There's a strong cult of Stern Alia there, who is the mother of Stratus, as well as Hieronius and Hextor. One of the cool things that they did here was that Stratus had 4 arms. That's why he has 4 weapons, which is kind of a neat play on the fact that his brother Hieronius only had 2 arms. He had 4, and Hextor had 6 arms. And they're all gods of war, of good, neutrality, and evil. I thought that was a nice touch that they did. There is Mordengard here, which is a dwarvish realm. Although it's kind of a weird dwarvish realm, it's almost like a communist republic kind of thing. It's weird. There are free states here, and this disputed region, which is basically an excuse to have neutral ground that all the factions can get to and have battles. And you don't have to contrive that. How are the humans going to fight the undead when there's this in the way? They just have this large amorphous mass of unclaimed territory in the middle where they could all theoretically meet. There is also Kilsec, which is a Drow faction, or Drow for you. And they're actually connected directly to the Flanaess. They're a faction that was driven out of Erelhai Kinlu and traveled to this area through underground passages in the underworld. The rest of the book is basically rules for the skirmishing, and of course, obviously, there's a lot more detail and a lot more fluff and background on the different factions, and they were very much expanded on in Dragon Magazine for a couple of years, which is really cool stuff. I mean, they were one step shy of making it a setting unto itself for D&D, and personally, I think it's a shame that they never did that. Now, what I did several years ago, and what you're seeing on the screen here now, is I took that map and I took some of the details from the various modules scenario books and things like that they had come out with for Chainmail. And I took a crack at putting it into a Darlene style map. So it would actually be a setting that you could use in D&D, and you're seeing it here. You can see we've got Thalos in the island, and Ravilla is here, and Drazen's Horde is down here, and so forth. You're seeing a very low resolution version of it here. I've got more files on my hard drive, obviously. And at one point, what I'm going to do is remake these and put them out into the field so that folks can have them. Don't ask when. It's going to be a long time coming because they're a bit of work to do, obviously. But I had done this at one point, and you can see that they really do work as D&D maps. If you take the time to do it. It's also funny that they link together with the Empire of Lynn, which is something that is mentioned in Francois Freudel's Chronicles of the Black Moon, which was a series of graphic novels that were, if, at some point, Gary Gygax had wanted Francois to do part of the World of Greyhawk as his own thing, and they would publish it. It never happened, obviously, but it did end up being detailed in these things, and it plugs in here, which is kind of neat. So there's lots of different connections with all this beyond the Flanaess stuff, and so much to unravel. I did do a bunch of work on this on the blog a couple years ago. You can look at some of my speculations and connections there. And the beautiful thing about all this is it also all comes together with that map of Oerik that was in Dragon Annual #1 many years ago. Everything that you see with the Sundered Empire and with the Empire of Lynn and everything, it all plugs in exactly onto that map. So I know a lot of Greyhawk fans don't like that map. It's basically just a big box with a bunch of triangles stuck on it, weird angles. I agree, it's not a very inspired map, but it is a canon map. And even though I've personally come up with an alternative map that I published on the blog a couple years ago, or last year or something, the fact remains that it is a canonic. In terms of what's been published, that's official. And I know a lot of people hate the word official. Don't tell me what I can do in my game. It's not about that at all. It's about what's been published, and what's been published is the box with triangles. And but the good news is that they have taken the time to flesh it out, and there's all this material there, all these great little kingdoms and factions and NPCs, and it's got a very nice setup for the setting, and it does connect directly to the Flanaess, and it's something that I personally will probably delve into a little more deeply as the months and years go on, and like I say, I'm going to redo my maps and put together a gazetteer and so forth. When I'm done with my Zahindia material, I'll move on to the Celestial Kingdom, and then comes the stuff in the Sundered Empire. So anyway, I hope this was gave you a little bit of an introduction, at least, to all this great material. If you've got access to those Dragon magazines from the early 2000s, please take a look through there. You'll find a bunch of follow-up articles that really flesh things out. If you can dig up the Chainmail material, please do so. The miniatures are really nice. I obviously mine it more for the setting material and any kind of little links I can find that impact the Flanaess, but it's really a neat little place in and of itself. The game is not bad at all, and it's just yet another little corner of Greyhawk that a lot of people don't even realize has been fleshed out, and I just thought it would be neat to introduce you to it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss any videos. I've got a Patreon, I've got a web store that sells a whole bunch of stuff. I got a bunch of free downloads on the blog. Everything's down below. Anyway, I'm off to see Spider-Man this evening, so you expect to see a spoiler-free / spoiler ghettoized review coming soon, and I will talk to you all later. Have a great day. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.